So those are the three different states of matter. Those are the three different states of matter. I believe we are moving together. Remember, the ship is moving, and we are not going back from where we have come from. These are the basics of science in grade 8. And it is very simple. Very simple. Yes, as simple as you will answer me later. Now, back to different properties of matter. We have known what matter is. We have known what matter is. We have known the three states of matter. The three states of matter. And we have known that matter is made up of particles. So let's see, what are these properties? What are these properties? What are these properties? Now, when you talk about a property, this meaning of property, it means some characteristics, some behavior. How do they exist? How do these particular states, matter, how do matter behave? How do matter exist? Are they able to move from one point to another? When heated, how are they? Do they change? Yes, those are the properties we want to talk about. Are they heavy? Are they lighter? Yes, that is what we want to talk about. The properties of matter. What are their shape? Do they have volume? Are they able to have a higher density or not? If we are able to compress them, are they incompressible? Are they compressible? Yes. Are they able to flow? Yes, those are the characteristics, or rather the properties of matter in different states we want to talk about. So we want to look at the property of matter in solid. We want to look at the properties of matter in liquids. And we want to also look at the properties of matter in gases. How do the gases behave? Let's say we have picked a property called shape. How do solid look like? What are their shape? Are they oval? Are they circular? Do they have a shape that can be defined? Do they have a fixed shape? We look at the shape and say, this is oval, this is rectangular, this is a square shape. Yes, this is circular shape. That is what I want to talk about. Look at volume. Do the solids have a fixed volume? Yes. Can we identify and know that this particular solid has this particular volume? Yes, we want to check at those properties. Now, back to properties of matter. Now, number one property that we want to look at is density. Number one property is density. Yes, properties of matter in different states. Now, we want to look at density in solid. We want to look at density of matter in liquid, density of matter in gases. Now, what is density? Sometimes you might ask yourself, what is density? What is density? Now, density refers to mass per unit volume. Mass per unit volume. Mass per unit volume. That is density. That is density. Let's underline mass and let's underline volume. So we have two parameters here. That is mass and that is volume. Now, density, it refers to mass per unit volume. Now, when you have, for example, let's talk about a locker of this nature here. There is a locker in front of me here. So you have the locker. The locker has some matter inside it. Now those matter, remember we said they have mass. So the matter has what? Mass. That is what we talk about. So you put the book inside, they occupy the space. And that is volume. Now volume is the amount of space occupied by matter. So when you put the books inside the locker, they are going to occupy the space. And that space, the amount of space, is what we call volume. And then matter, the books that you're putting inside, or rather any example of matter you want to put inside the locker, that is matter. That is matter. So what is density? It is mass. When you have matter and you have space, that is what we call the density. Now, back to what is mass. We know that mass is just the weight. How about volume? Volume, we've said it is the space. Yes, volume is the space. Another point, we have to know that mass is always measured. Mass is always measured in kilogram. Mass is measured in kilogram. Mass is measured in what? In kilogram. In bracket, kg. In bracket kg. How about volume? How about volume? Volume, we know that volume is measured in cubic meter. In cubic what? Cubic meter. In bracket mq. That is what volume is measured in. So we have to note that the mass measured in kilogram, that is kg, and volume measured in cubic meter, that is m cube, are the SI units, are the SI units for mass and volume respectively. Are the SI unit for mass and volume respectively. Yes, these are the SI unit, the international system. Now we realize that there's some group of scientists that came up with the SI units, and they mentioned the SI unit of mass as kilogram. They also measured the SI unit of volume as meters. Now these are the SI units. These are the SI units. Now back to density. We know that density is mass per unit volume. Mass per unit what? Volume. So this is what density means. This is the meaning of density. You have mass and you have volume. Amount of space occupied by matter. So that is it. Density is mass per unit what? Volume. Yes. So whenever you ask the SI unit of density, SI unit of density, what will you say? We've known that for mass, it is kilogram. And for volume, it is cubic meter. Therefore, density will be equals to kilogram all over volume. Kilogram over volume. And we know that volume, kilogram is kg, volume is m cube. So this is the SI unit. The SI unit for density. Kilogram per m cube. Kg per m cube. So that is the SI unit of density. So whenever you ask the meaning of density as a learner, you have to know that density refers to mass per unit volume. There must be mass, there must be volume. And therefore, mass is measured in kilogram, volume is measured in cubic meter. Therefore, it is kg over m cube. That is the SI unit for volume. How do the density of these different states of matter or a matter behave? What is the density of these particular matters in different states? What is the density of the matter in different states? So let's talk about the density of solids. How do they behave? Now we realize that in solids, the density is high. Why am I saying so? They have the highest density. Because you look at the particles of solids, they are closely packed together. They are strongly held by a force. That is why they have a higher density. They are strongly held by a force. Now we realize that in solids, we say solids have a higher density. Solids have the highest density, compared to liquids and gases. Solids have higher density compared to liquids and gases. So you realize that the solid particles, they have the highest mass. Look at the particles. They are closely held together by a stronger force. So therefore they have a higher density or the highest density compared to liquids and gases. Look at the particles of liquids. They are weakly held by the forces. And the name of such forces or example of such forces include the intermolecular forces. These forces are able to hold the particles together. Now these forces in solids, they are strong, very strong, as compared to those in liquids and gases. You look at those particles of liquid, they are stronger than those of gases. They are strongly held than those of gases. Now you realize that the density of solid, it is too high as compared to liquids. And the density of liquid particles is also high compared to those of gases because of the forces of attraction that holds the particles together. Now you can say solids have the highest density compared to liquid and gases. This is because of strong forces of attraction between the particles of solids, So you realize that the particles are very strongly held as compared to those of liquids and gases. Such a force is called intermolecular force. Such a force is called intermolecular force. So the molecules of solid, they are strongly held. The particles of solid, they are strongly held by the intermolecular force. Now, what is this intermolecular force? So you can say intermolecular forces this is a force This is a force that holds the particles of matter together. The particles of matter together. This is a force that holds the particles of matter together. That is what we call the intermolecular force. So you realize that the solid, for example, this marker pen, you realize that it is a solid. Now the particles holding these, the force holding these particles together, it is called intermolecular force. Now it is able to hold the particles of this particular plastic together. Therefore, we realize that the density of such particular solid is high. So how about in liquids? We can say liquid particles. We all know that liquid particles exist between those of solid and those of gases. We know that in liquids, the particles exist between those of solid and gases. Example of such a liquid is water. Look at the density of water. You realize that the particles of water are weakly held by these forces. Now these forces holding the water molecules, they hold them in a weaker manner. Therefore, we realize that the density in liquid is lower as compared to those of solid. So we can say the density of liquids is lower as compared, or is low as compared to those of solids, How about gases? You can say and are higher than those of gases. Why? This is because the force that holds the liquid particles is weaker as compared to those of solids, and stronger as compared to those of gases. So why are we saying that these are the properties of matter? So you realize that particles of solid, they are strongly held. Therefore, they have a higher density. Now, property number one, we talked about density. And we have known that density is mass per unit volume. So we must have matter having the mass. And we also must have a space that any matter will occupy. And that is what we call volume. So you realize that in solid, they have the highest density compared to those of liquids and gases because of the stronger intermolecular forces holding the particles together. In liquids, the particles also have a higher density than those of gases, but lower density than those of solid because of the forces of attraction, for forces that attract the particles. Now in gases, they have, we can say, gases have a lower density, or you can say have the lowest density. Gases have the lowest density, have the lowest density as compared to those of solids and liquids. Good. To those of solids and what? And liquids. Yes, that is why. Now, why is that happening? This is because the particles move freely and therefore they have a weaker force of attraction. This is because they have weaker force. The weaker force holding the particles together. So you can see and compare. Look at water. You realize that water, the mass of water is not as small or as much as compared to those of a solid like a stone. You look at the mass of a gas, let's say carbon dioxide. Look at the weight and you compare it with that of a stone. So you realize that stone particles are strongly held together by a force called intermolecular force, giving them a higher density compared to those of liquid and gases. So I hope you've understood that. That is property number 1. That is density. Properties of matter in different states. Let's meet in the next lesson so that we can discuss other properties of matter in different states. Remember the states: solid state, liquid state, and gas state. Now, in liquid state, we have seen that the density is high as compared to liquid and gas. So those particles in solid, they are strongly held by forces of attraction. An example of such forces that holds the particles together is intermolecular force. And then look at liquids. The forces of attraction, they are weak compared to those of solid, and they are strong as compared to those of gases. Bye bye.